Before you listen to this story, let me tell you something no one ever told me when I needed it most. Not every mother is a protector. Not every sister is your shield. And not every family is a home. Some homes are battlegrounds built with beautiful lies. Some daughters learn to smile with shattered hearts. My name is Emily Whitmore. And this story isn't about forgiveness. It's about survival, secrets, and the price of silence. It's about what happens when a girl who was ignored for too long finally decides to speak, to fight, to take back everything that was stolen from her. If you're here, watching this, hit that subscribe button, not because I need the numbers, but because somewhere out there, another Emily is watching too, wondering if she's crazy or if her pain is real. This one's for her, and maybe, just maybe, for you. I was 17 when I first saw my mother cry. And even then, I didn't believe it. Not because tears didn't fall from her eyes, but because the pain never reached them. Her face twisted, the way a person rehearses in front of a mirror, not the way someone bleeds from their soul. We were standing in the burnt remains of our family home, ash beneath our feet, smoke still curling in the air, and everything I thought I understood about love, trust, and safety had just turned into charcoal. But the story doesn't start with fire. It starts with silence. I was a quiet child, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had already learned that my voice was currency no one wanted to spend. My father, John Whitmore, was the kind of man who believed in presence without participation, always there but never involved, nodding through life, paying bills and passing time. His eyes always on the television, never on me. And my mother, Diane, she was the opposite, loud where he was quiet, fire where he was fog. But her power wasn't in what she said, it was in what she withheld. Her love was conditional, her affection, performative, her smile, weaponized. The neighborhood called her a saint. She organized bake sales and food drives, always dressed like a magazine cover. But behind closed doors, she ruled with a look. I learned early that food could be used as punishment, that silence could be sharper than a slap, that praise came with a price. And then there was Lena, my older sister. She was sunlight bottled into a girl, brilliant, rebellious, and unafraid. For years, she was the buffer between me and Mom. Whenever Diane lashed out, Lena took the blow, sometimes with words, sometimes with broken glass. I remember one night when I was 10 and spilled juice on the white carpet. Diane's face went white hot with fury, and I braced for the slap. But Lena stepped in, said it was her fault, took the punishment without blinking. I idolized her. And then one day, she was gone, just like that. 19 years old, full scholarship to a university she never attended, disappeared without a note. Diane said she ran off with a boy. My father said nothing. And me, I searched. I scrolled through forums, sent emails to people I didn't know, asked questions at the police station that got me nothing but sympathetic smiles. She's an adult, they said. She probably just needed space. But I knew my sister, and I knew she didn't just leave me. Years passed like ghosts through my life. I became quieter, sharper. I excelled in school because success was the only way to breathe in that house. I learned to mimic my mother's smile, to speak only when spoken to hide my grief in books and piano keys. And then came the email that changed everything. No subject, no sender, just a single sentence. Do you want to know what really happened the night I left? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my throat. Another message followed. Meet me at the old train station. Midnight, alone. Signed, L. My chest caved inward. Lena. I didn't tell anyone. Not that I had anyone to tell. I snuck out at 11:45. Heart in my shoes. That's in a storm. The train station had been abandoned for years. Just rusted tracks and forgotten benches. But she was there, older, thinner, with scars she didn't have before. But her eyes, the fire in them still burned. We didn't hug right away. She looked at me like I was a dream she didn't dare trust. And then she whispered my name. and I ran into her arms. We sat beneath the cracked roof of the platform, knees touching, breath misting in the cold air, and she told me everything about Diane's double life, about the envelopes of cash, about names whispered in late-night phone calls, about powerful men in the town whose secrets Diane kept for a price. Lena had found documents, had threatened to go to the press. She never got the chance. One night, she came home to find her laptop smashed, her room ransacked, and a single note in Diane's handwriting: leave, or next time it's your grave. So she left, took cash she'd hidden, vanished into another state, lived in motels, waitressed under fake names, and watched from afar. She's grooming you, Lena said, gripping my hand. You're the new Lena now, the obedient daughter, the pretty face she can parade in front of people while she sells poison behind the curtain. I didn't want to believe it, but I already knew it was true. The way Diane had begun asking about my future, about who I talked to at school, about whether I ever felt unsafe, the way she snooped through my phone. The night I found a recorder hidden in my backpack, Lena gave me a flash drive, told me it had everything I needed to understand. Don't trust Dad either. She said, he's not innocent, he's just quieter about it. I returned home like a girl carrying fire in her lungs. I hid the drive inside my violin case and began pretending to love, pretending to obey, pretending to be blind. But that night, I listened to recordings of Diane blackmailing businessmen. I read transcripts of deals made in hidden bank accounts. I saw photos of her with people she publicly condemned: politicians, real estate developers, even a pastor. Lena hadn't lied. Our mother was a queen built on threats, and she'd tried to bury her own daughter to keep her empire intact. Over the next few weeks, I became her shadow. I mirrored her routines, learned her codes, stole keys to the filing cabinet she thought was safe. I began building my own archive copies of documents, photos, transaction logs. I created an encrypted folder called Emily Whitmore, and I emailed backup copies to an anonymous address. I made allies small ones. My history teacher who once warned me to keep my eyes open, a librarian who helped me scan documents without asking why. I even reached out to a local podcaster who specialized in corruption stories. Bit by bit, I laid the groundwork. And then it happened. Diane caught me, not with the files, but in a lie. She asked where I was the night before. I said study group. She already knew I wasn't. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You remind me of your sister, she said, voice like velvet laced with acid, stubborn, curious, dangerous. That night, my room was searched, my drawers overturned. But I was ready. The flash drive was gone, hidden under a loose tile at the old train station. I moved all my notes online. The only thing left behind was the truth. The next day, the house burned. Electrical fire, they said, total loss. But I saw the gas can hidden behind the shed. I saw the matches in Diane's purse. She wanted to erase the evidence, but I had already made sure it would survive. Lena and I met in a rented room in another county. We printed everything, sorted it into folders, labeled each scandal like a chapter in a horror novel. You ready? She asked, and I said, no, but let's do it anyway. We mailed one set to a reporter in DC, another to a district attorney, and kept one for ourselves. And then we waited. When the story broke, it shattered like glass. The headline read, "Respected community leader exposed in multi-million-dollar corruption ring." Diane's face was everywhere. My father tried to defend her. Then he was arrested too for laundering. The town was in chaos. And me, I stood in the middle of the storm. Finally seen, finally heard. Lena and I moved into a small apartment outside the city. The days ahead would be hard court cases, interviews, threats. But we were together, and I had learned that even in a world built on lies, the truth can still win. You just have to burn the right house down. We thought the storm would end after the headlines, that the truth alone could uproot the decades of rot we had uncovered. But justice doesn't move with the swiftness of heartbreak. It limps, drags its feet, and sometimes forgets who it's fighting for. After my mother and father were arrested, the town didn't exactly wrap us in comfort or call us brave. They looked at us like we were contaminated. Like exposing the truth made us dangerous rather than the ones who had hidden it. The news cycle spun for days. Interviews were requested and refused. And Lena and I found ourselves tucked in a tiny second-floor apartment with a leaky ceiling and walls too thin to hold our secrets. It was the first time we had ever truly lived alone, free from surveillance, free from whispered threats at the dinner table, but also free from protection. The police had made promises, but promises don't mean much when you're up against people who have decades of power buried in their back pockets. We were anonymous enough to feel safe, but not invisible enough to sleep soundly at night. Lena would pace the living room while I sat on the floor sorting papers. Our entire history now reduced to folders, evidence logs, voice notes, and redacted names we hadn't yet uncovered. We were fighting more than just our parents now. We were digging into a whole network, and every name we uncovered came with a risk. One of those names was Judge Malcolm Reed, a man who had sentenced hundreds of people over 30 years, including mothers like ours, just never ours. He had been in 2 of Diane's bank transactions, labeled only as security support. We found photos of them at charity events, always standing too close. Lena had a theory Judge Reed helped bury cases Diane didn't want public. He's part of the system that protected her, she said, eyes burning with sleepless rage. If we don't expose him, this entire thing will be cosmetic. So we dug deeper, requested court records, watched old interviews, even posed as grad students researching judicial ethics. The more we found, the uglier it got. Reed had dismissed 3 corruption charges tied to Diane's business partners in the past decade. Every dismissal was followed by a deposit into an offshore account connected to a shell company. It was all there in paperwork, in emails we decrypted using one of Lena's burner laptops, in conversations pulled from cloud backups we'd scraped off Diane's digital footprint before the fire. But what made it personal, what made my hands shake with fury, was a photo of Lena, 16 years old, bruised and standing outside the courthouse with Judge Reed walking past her like she was invisible. He'd known, they all had known. One night, Lena and I were sorting through the last of the financial statements when our window shattered. A brick came through the glass, wrapped in paper that read, "Enough, you got your revenge. Stop now." We froze. The apartment went silent except for our breath. I grabbed my phone and called the police, but when they arrived, all they did was sweep up the glass and tell us to be cautious. No patrol, no trace, just a shrug and a warning. That was the night I realized this wasn't over. We weren't on the offensive anymore. We were being hunted. We spent the next week in a hotel outside the city. Using fake names, Lena wore a hat everywhere. I changed my hair color from brunette to deep auburn. And we used prepaid phones we bought in separate towns. Our goal was no longer just to survive, it was to bring the whole network down. We needed help. And that's when I remembered Mr. Ellison, my AP government teacher. He had once told me, if the law is a maze, corruption is the thing that keeps changing the exits. I emailed him from an encrypted account. I didn't say much, just a question. Do you still believe in accountability? He replied within an hour. When and where? We met at a park 2 towns away. All 3 of us bundled in layers to hide our nerves. Lena did most of the talking, laying out the evidence. The threats, the names. Ellison didn't flinch. He took notes, asked precise questions, and said, "There's a journalist I trust. He's not local. He doesn't scare easy." That's how we met Ava Grant, a hard-hitting investigative reporter who had been fired twice for digging too deep. She agreed to work with us under one condition: no redactions. If I run this, I run everything. We agreed. Over the next 2 months, we handed her everything: files, audio, witness names, and digital records we'd gathered from the ashes of our old life. Ava worked fast. She confirmed our sources, tracked offshore accounts, and dug up cases Diane had silenced years ago. The day she called us with her final draft, we cried, not just from relief, but because someone else finally believed us. The story went live at midnight, titled, "The Queenmaker's Collapse: How One Family's Corruption Poisoned a Town." Within hours, it went viral. National outlets picked it up. The governor made a statement. Judge Reed was suspended pending investigation. Diane and John were moved to a federal facility. More arrests followed: lawyers, real estate heads, even the town's former mayor. And us, we were told to go into protective custody. We refused. We weren't running anymore. We held a press conference, faces exposed, no masks. "We're not victims," I said into the microphone. "We're witnesses, survivors, and we're just getting started." For a while, it felt like we'd won. We got calls from lawyers, podcast invitations, even a book agent. But fame wasn't our goal. Truth was, and truth, as we'd learned, is never convenient. 2 weeks after the article dropped, we received a letter without a return address. It read, "You cut one head, but the body's still alive." Inside the envelope was a single photo of me, walking alone near a cafe, taken from a distance. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. And we were ready. After that letter arrived, nothing felt safe anymore. Not the door we triple locked. Not the faces on TV praising our bravery. Not even the shadows beneath our own shoes. Fear became a second skin again. But unlike before, we didn't wear it. Quietly we studied it, cataloged it, sharpened it until it became something like strategy. We scanned every envelope, watched every parked car longer than a few seconds, tracked every face that lingered near us too long. Lena was the first to suggest moving again. "They're watching, Em." That photo wasn't a threat, it was a warning shot. We're back on someone's radar. But I didn't want to move. Not again. I had just started building something resembling normal: a part-time job at a bookstore, a morning coffee ritual, the idea of sleep without waking up in a cold sweat. Still, I agreed, because Lena had stopped sleeping altogether. And when she did, she screamed in her dreams. We relocated to a rural town 2 hours away under new names, Emily and Lena Brooks. Our apartment was smaller, our furniture secondhand, and our internet prepaid and filtered through VPNs. I went back to school online. Lena worked night shifts at a bar, saying it was easier to trust people in the dark. But even in that quiet town, we weren't invisible for long. Someone followed me from the grocery store one evening. A man in a gray hoodie who pretended to tie his shoe every time I glanced back. I cut through alleyways and ducked into a diner. He vanished. But I didn't forget. A week later, a USB stick was left in our mailbox with no note. On it, a single video, my father, inside a prison interview room, speaking directly to the camera. "Emily," he said, his voice like gravel and guilt, "if you're seeing this, it means they've started moving again. The ones your mother answered to. The ones we couldn't touch." His eyes flicked towards something. Off camera, then back. "You think Diane was the root. She was a branch, a poisoned one, yes, but not the tree. There are people with deeper pockets, older dads. You uncovered their puppet, but now they're sending new ones. Protect yourself. Find the name Cobalt." That's where it started. The video ended. My hand shook. Cobalt? What was Cobalt? A company, a person, a code. I called Lena immediately. She didn't answer. Panic bloomed. I called again. Still nothing. I ran to the bar she worked at. She wasn't there. Her manager said she'd left early. Looking pale, my lungs squeezed tight. I ran home. She wasn't there either. But her phone was on the floor of our kitchen. Screen cracked, and beside it, a torn piece of paper. "You opened the door. Now let's talk." No number, no name, just that sentence. My brain split between action and terror. I called the police, filed a missing person report. But the moment they saw our past cases, they gave each other that look, the one that says this is bigger than we're trained for. I didn't wait. I started digging into Cobalt myself. I traced mentions in our old files, scoured court records, dug through whistleblower forums, finally. A breakthrough. Cobalt was the name of a shell corporation used to hide wire transfers related to political lobbying in our state. It had no listed employees, no real address, just a PO box linked to a private equity firm in DC, the same firm that once donated to Judge Reed's campaign. It was all connected. I reached out to Ava Grant, the reporter who had helped off the fake drive into my coat pocket, and walked into the lion's den. The mill was dark and smelled like mold and rust. I heard voices before I saw faces, 3 men, all in black, with earpieces and cold smiles. One of them was already holding Lena by the arm. Emily Whitmore. One said, "You've been busy. Where's my sister?" I demanded. "You'll see her first." The drive. I pulled it from my coat. "Let her go first." "That's not how this works," he said. He reached for it. I stepped back. "Let her go." Then all hell broke loose. A siren blared. The drone Avis hovered overhead, red light blinking. The men panicked. One pulled a gun. I dove behind a pillar. Lena screamed. Police sirens approached. Taver had called a private security firm as backup. Shots were fired. Screams, chaos. When I finally reached Lena, her robes had been cut in the chaos, and she was stumbling toward me. We ran. We didn't stop until we collapsed miles down the road, breathless and blood-smeared, but alive. Ava met us at the safe house. "They're not amateurs," she said. "Whoever's funding this has layers." Over the next few weeks, her story unraveled the next tier of the conspiracy. Cobalt was connected to political blackmail, real estate gentrification, even trafficking under the guise of rehabilitation programs, and Diane, our mother, had been one of many brokers. Lena recovered slowly. I never left her side. We slept with knives under our pillows. Eva's story went live 3 weeks later. Congress opened an inquiry. Protesters rallied outside the prison. More arrests were made. But we knew it wasn't over. Because 2 nights later, I got another message. Just one line, "Daughters die slower." And I realized we were still in the opening chapter of a war none of us had asked for. The words "daughters die slower" carved themselves into my skull like a curse I couldn't shake, an echo I couldn't silence, no matter how loud the world around me became. And in the days that followed, it wasn't fear that anchored itself in my chest, it was rage, pure, focused, electrified rage. I was done flinching, done whispering, done hiding behind shadows, while the people who had tried to break me slithered between headlines and legal loopholes. I looked at Lena one morning, her face still bruised from the abduction, her eyes distant tanned. I knew we had reached a crossroads. We could run again, disappear, start over under new names in a new state. Or we could finish this. We burn it all down, I said quietly. Lena didn't hesitate. All of it. So we began with the thing we hadn't dared to confront yet. The people who had funded Cobalt. The Shell Corporation was just a mask. But behind that mask were real faces: politicians, judges, law enforcement heads, and worst of all, people who had smiled in our family photos when I was a child. Our mother hadn't just built power. She had inherited it. The rot ran deep through generations, through boardrooms and Sunday churches, through nonprofit galas and community improvement funds. But one name stood out more than the rest: Harlan M. Cross, a billionaire philanthropist with ties to every person who had helped cover up the crimes my mother and father were part of. Harlan wasn't just connected to Cobalt, he was Cobalt, the founder, the architect, the king of the machine that had destroyed Lena's life and tried to erase mine. He had once donated to my elementary school's library. I remembered shaking his hand at a ribbon-cutting ceremony when I was 9. He had smiled at me like I was his granddaughter. Now he was the monster. I gave Ava the name, the connections, everything we had on him. "If we publish this," she warned, "we'll lose every sponsor I've ever had." "Then lose them," I said, "because we've already lost too much." Ava's article hit harder than any of us anticipated. It exposed Harlan's dark money trail, how his charities were fronts, how he bought silence from victims' families, how he used his influence to build a protective bubble around people like my mother. The fallout was nuclear. Congressional hearings were called. Protesters flooded the gates of Harlan's mansion. But it wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel it, to understand what it's like when the walls close in. So Lena and I went further. We found his daughter, Elise Cross, a woman only a few years older than me who had once run away from the public eye after a mental health episode. We tracked her down in Vermont, living quietly under an alias. At first, she wouldn't talk to us, but when we told her what her father had done not just to us, but to dozens of families, she cracked. She had her own stories, horrifying ones. Harlan had used her as leverage in corporate deals, threatened to have her institutionalized when she resisted, even forced her to cover for donation events that were really laundering operations. He's not just cruel, she said. He's evil. You have no idea what he's capable of. Elise gave us access to old journals, handwritten schedules, and most importantly, a list of names, people Harlan had silenced, paid, or blackmailed. Over the years, it was a kill list disguised as philanthropy. We knew this was our chance to do real damage, but we needed reach. So I agreed to go on camera. I sat down with a national news outlet, stared into the lens, and told the world who I was and what had been done to me. I spoke about Diane and John, about Lena's disappearance, about the network of men in suits who passed daughters around like poker chips. I cried. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finally unafraid. The interview went viral within hours. I became the face of something bigger than my family. People sent letters, messages, videos of support, but not all of them were kind. Death threats started pouring in. My social media accounts were hacked. Lena was nearly run off the road again by an unmarked SUV. But we kept pushing. Ava published Elise's interview next. Harlan issued a denial, of course, claiming we were mentally unstable young women with a vendetta. But the evidence was overwhelming. Days later, the FBI raided his estate. He was charged with conspiracy, racketeering, and witness tampering. But even as they dragged him away, he smiled. That smile chilled me more than any threat, because Harlan knew something, and I was about to find out what. It started with a knock at our apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a beige coat holding a badge. She introduced herself as Agent Claire Morrison, said she was with Internal Affairs, wanted to clarify some details in our Cobalt testimony. But something felt wrong. Her badge looked off. I asked her to wait. I called Ava, asked her to verify Morrison. Ava called back 2 minutes later. There's no Agent Claire Morrison. Don't open the door. But it was too late. Our window shattered from the back. A second person entered. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept by the fridge and screamed for Lena. The woman kicked the door in. She wasn't FBI, she was hired muscle. A fight broke out, me against a woman twice my size. Lena wrestling with the man who had come through the window. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't Hollywood. It was messy and raw and terrifying. But we won. Lena got the man's gun. I knocked the woman unconscious with the bat. We tied them both with zip ties and called the real police. They were arrested. But the message was clear. Someone had paid to have us silenced again. And that's when I realized something. We weren't going to be safe until we flipped the mirror, until we stopped defending ourselves and started dismantling the structure piece by piece. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted someone from Diane's old circle, someone I remembered from childhood, someone who owed us a favor. His name was Eli Masters, a defense lawyer turned whistleblower. I offered him immunity through Ava's contacts if he gave us the full organizational chart, the names behind Cobalt, the successors, the cleaners. He agreed, and what he gave us changed everything. Because my mother, Diane Whitmore, she wasn't just a tool, she was a founder, a co-founder of Cobalt, alongside Harlan Cross, which meant everything we had done so far had only scratched the surface. And the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who once said, You remind me of your sister before setting our world on fire had been one of the architects of this empire of silence. I felt like I was drowning, like I had spent years climbing toward light only to find that the ceiling was made of glass. And she had been watching me the whole time from the other side. But I didn't break. I looked at Lena. She nodded. Now we bury her for real, she said. And so we did. When I closed the file that confirmed my mother as a co-founder of Cobalt, it felt like I had touched a live wire. Every memory, every moment of confusion or pain from my childhood suddenly reassembled itself with cruel clarity. And the pieces no longer formed a family, they formed a blueprint for manipulation. Diane Whitmore hadn't just been complicit in the crimes that destroyed Lena's life and nearly ended mine. She had built the foundation, brick by bloody brick. I remembered her perfectly manicured hands brushing my hair, her voice soft like velvet laced with poison, her constant insistence that we don't talk about problems outside this house. Now I knew why. The house was the problem. For 3 nights, I couldn't sleep. I sat in front of my laptop replaying voice memos, rereading financial logs, connecting names to dates, to decisions, to disappearances. Lena tried to get me to rest. She said we'd done enough. But there was something inside me now, something sharper than grief, more dangerous than anger. I needed to end it completely. I needed to pull Cobalt out by the root, even if that meant dragging my own blood through the dirt. And to do that, we needed to follow the money. Ava connected us with the financial crimes analyst Jonas Feldman, a quiet man in his 50s who had once worked for the IRS and now exposed laundering operations on the dark web. He examined the documents Eli had provided and confirmed our worst fear. Cobalt had multiple backup structures, all tied to offshore banks in the Caymans, in Zurich, and strangely in a small tax haven on a Pacific island I'd never heard of. It wasn't just blackmail and threats. They were moving hundreds of millions of dollars through fake nonprofits, medical grants, and child wellness funds. They had corrupted everything good in the world and used it as a mask, and Diane's name was everywhere, hidden under aliases, disguised through subsidiaries. But everywhere. They never expected anyone to see the full picture. Jonas said, too many silos, too much compartmentalization. That's why you're dangerous. And we were. Lena and I began releasing small, curated leaks to trusted journalists, one scandal at a time. A fake cancer charity run by a senator's wife, a trafficking ring disguised as an adoption outreach in 3 states, a prison reform fund that funneled money into private security contracts. Its story exploded. Each one led to arrests. But with each headline, we got closer to the edge. We knew someone would try to stop us again. What we didn't expect was the betrayal. His name was Caleb Wright. He had been one of Ava's legal contacts, a corporate attorney turned whistleblower who had helped us draft protections for lease cross and file anonymous disclosures. I had trusted him, had even started to lean on him emotionally. He was calm, sharp, thoughtful, the kind of man who asked how I was sleeping and actually listened. But Caleb wasn't just helping us. He was feeding information back to the remnants of Cobalt. I found out when I noticed small changes in how our files were being accessed, IP addresses we didn't recognize, timing patterns that matched Caleb's availability. So I set a trap. I uploaded a fake document suggesting we had located a hidden vault in Zurich with names of every Cobalt affiliate. Within 24 hours, someone tried to hack our Swiss contact. I confronted Caleb the next day. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with something like regret. They'll kill you if you keep going, he said. I was trying to protect you. I slapped him so hard my palm stung for an hour. I sent the chat logs to Ava. Caleb vanished the next day. We never saw him again. That betrayal shook me. But it also clarified something I'd been avoiding. We were alone. No one was coming to rescue us. And that was fine. Because we didn't need rescuing, we needed vengeance. So we targeted the financial core of Cobalt, the Whisper Fund, a multi-million-dollar hedge account that funded everything from legal bribes to private kidnappings. It was run by 3 people, all of whom had kept their hands clean until now. But we had their signatures, their locations, their schedules. Lena and I flew to New York under false names and broke into one of their penthouses not to hurt them, but to take what we needed. We copied files, stole encrypted drives, photographed hidden safes. When the news broke 2 days later, it wasn't just scandal, it was evidence, cold, hard proof. One of the executives fled the country, one was arrested, the third tried to take his own life. We were dismantling Cobalt piece by piece. But then, Diane reached out, through a letter, handwritten, delivered by an anonymous courier. "You think you're winning," she wrote, "but you're only scattering ants. The queen is still alive, and you were born in her image." I read that letter 10 times. Each time, I hated her more. But I also feared her, because she was. Right, our blood connected us. And if I wasn't careful, I'd become the thing I was trying to destroy. I started having nightmares of rooms burning, of Lena screaming, of me becoming Diane. I told Lena. She held my hand and said, "That's exactly why you won't, because you care." We burned the letter that night, but I kept the handwriting. I wanted it as a reminder. We had one goal left now: expose Diane publicly, fully, unforgivingly. So we did what we hadn't dared to do yet. We leaked the family tapes, recordings from our childhood home, footage Diane had kept for control, for manipulation, for blackmail. We found them in a cloud account tied to one of her aliases, ours a video. Me crying after being slapped, Lena cleaning a cut on her leg, Diane screaming, John standing silent in the background. We leaked it all anonymously to major media outlets. It didn't take long to trace it back. Diane's trial was moved up. The evidence was undeniable. The public turned against her. Even her remaining allies abandoned her. For the first time, she was truly alone. And when the verdict was read guilty on all counts, I sat in the courtroom with Lena beside me. Diane didn't look at us, but I looked at her. I wanted her to see, to feel, not my hatred, not my anger, but my strength. The kind she never managed to kill, the kind she accidentally raised. When they took her away in chains, the audience applauded, and I didn't smile, I didn't cheer, I just exhaled, because the root had been cut. But I knew the soil was still poisoned, and we had more digging to do. Diane's sentencing should have been the finish line, the moment the dust settled and we could finally exhale without wondering who was hiding in the shadows. But in our story, silence was never safety, and closure wasn't something the world handed out easily to girls like us. For every victory we carved out, there was a new ghost crawling out of the woodwork, and not even a courtroom filled with truth could cauterize wounds that had been festering for decades. After the verdict, Lena and I stayed silent in the parking lot, sitting on the hood of our borrowed car, watching the press shout questions into a sky that felt too blue for such a dark day. I kept thinking about Diane's final glare, the one that didn't beg, didn't apologize, didn't even hate. It was a look of calculation, of unfinished business. She was going away for life, yes. But something told me she had planted seeds long before her fall, and somewhere, something or someone was still growing in her shadow. That someone arrived just 6 days later, wrapped in a suit and smirking through an interview on a financial news channel. Arthur Vance, a former partner of Diane's from her early lobbying days, now rebranded as a crisis management consultant. He dismissed the trial as a tragic miscarriage of justice and called Lena and me media manipulating daughters seeking attention. I so rad. Arthur had once held me on his lap at Christmas when I was 5. I remembered the way his hand lingered too long on my back. And now here he was, trying to rewrite the ending of a story he helped start. Ivor tried to calm me. She said Arthur was just noise, trying to rally the remaining Cobalt sympathizers. But then strange things started happening again. Our apartment was broken into, nothing stolen, just rearranged, files moved, laptop left open, Lena's childhood necklace placed on her pillow. We received emails with no sender, photos of us in public, notes slid under our door with phrases like, "Your mother taught us well." We went back into lockdown mode. Ava moved us into a secure safe house and pulled into ex-military friends to stay nearby. But even with protection, Lena was unraveling. The trauma of her abduction, the relentless exposure, the constant threat it started eating at her. She wouldn't sleep, would barely eat. She paced for hours, whispering to herself, tapping her fingers against her skull like she was trying to knock the memories loose. One night, I found her curled in the bathtub, crying without sound. When I tried to touch her, she flinched. "They still have pieces of me," she whispered. "I don't know how to take them back." And I realized then exposing the truth doesn't undo the damage. It just shines a light on it. And some wounds can't heal in the spotlight. I tried to help her, tried therapy again, meds, walks, breathing exercises, but nothing stuck. Lena needed distance, so we made a hard choice. She went to a trauma clinic in northern Maine under a pseudonym. No phones, no media, just silence, the good kind, the healing kind, and I stayed behind to finish what we started alone. For the first time since the fire, I was alone. The quiet was suffocating, but I poured everything into the next phase, exposing Arthur. With Ava's help, I tracked his financials, his emails, his offshore records, and what we found chilled me. He had taken over what was left of Cobalt, quietly, carefully. He rebranded it as a think tank. The Artemis Group and had already resumed lobbying efforts through Educatio, nil campaigns, and community outreach. Different name, same monster. I compiled the data, built a report so airtight not even a paid-off senator could discredit it. But before I could publish, Ava was attacked. Her car was forced off the road. She survived, barely. But the message was clear. We were treading on dangerous ground again. And this time, I didn't have Lena beside me. I sat in Ava's hospital room, holding her hand as she slipped in and out of morphine dreams, and I knew what had to be done. We needed something bigger than journalism. We needed a full-scale government investigation. So I went to the one person I never thought I'd ask, Senator Claire Bradford, a hardline reformist who had publicly condemned Cobalt, but had refused to meet us before. I walked into her office with everything: files, photos, names. I told her about my mother, about Arthur, about the Artemis Group. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I laid the truth out like a scalpel and dared her to ignore it. She didn't. Claire called an emergency hearing the following week, and I testified under oath, under pressure, under the weight of every buried secret we had unearthed. I spoke for over 2 hours. When I finished, the room was dead silent. Claire leaned into her mic and said, "This isn't over. We're coming for them." And for the first time, I believed someone meant it. But power doesn't go quietly. 3 nights later, my apartment caught fire. Again. A message, a warning, a memory. I escaped through the window with only a sprained ankle and the files I'd stored in a fireproof box under the floorboards. But when I turned back to watch the flames eat through everything I owned, I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. I called Lena's clinic and left her a message she wouldn't hear for weeks. They tried again. I'm still here, but I think I finally understand. We were never just survivors. We were witnesses. And now we become judges. Because when silence stops being safe, truth becomes a weapon. And I was ready to wield it. Lena returned on a fog-drenched morning that smelled like burned leaves and rain-soaked regret. Stepping out of the car like someone who had walked through a storm made entirely of memory and somehow come out the other side not untouched, but unbroken. Her eyes were different now, quieter, sharper, like she had learned to live with the ghosts instead of trying to outrun them. I ran to her, hugged her too tightly, and for the first time in months, she didn't flinch. "You smell like smoke," she whispered, and I realized I hadn't washed the scent of the fire from my jacket yet. We sat for hours, drinking tea and unspooling everything that had happened while she was gone. Arthur's rise, Eva's crash, The fake think tank rebranded in marble halls and golden mission statements. The fire that nearly took me again. She listened without interrupting. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a journal. I wrote something for every day I was away, she said. And every single entry ends the same way. We finished this. And so we did. Only this time, we weren't just survivors chasing justice. We were women rebuilding the ruins into something sharper than truth evidence. And we started with names, the weight of them, the way they bend history when spoken aloud. We had names, dozens of them tied to donations, private deals, and ghost corporations that funneled money into the Artemis group. But we needed to make the public feel that way too. So we created a digital archive or searchable database called the Red Ledger, filled with every person, fund, court case, and scandal tied to Cobalt and Artemis. It was like setting off a bomb in slow motion. Reporters jumped on it, victims came forward, anonymous tips rolled in by the hour. The press called us the Sisters of Reckoning. We didn't crack them, but not everyone liked the noise. Within a week, Arthur made his boldest move yet. He sued us for defamation, claiming the Red Ledger was fabricated revenge porn. The lawsuit was national news. Talk shows argued about us. Pundits picked sides. And just like that, we were no longer the story. We were a spectacle. I could feel it slipping away. Everything we'd fought for, drowning in headlines about emotionally unstable daughters and truth inflation. But we refused to be silenced again. So when Senator Bradford called us to testify at a congressional oversight hearing, we said yes, no lawyers, no filters, just the truth, out loud. The hearing took place in a packed hall, buzzing with press and politics. Lena and I sat side by side, microphones in front of us. And when it was my turn, I opened with a sentence. I hadn't dared to speak until that moment. My name is Emily Whitmore. My mother helped build a criminal empire, and I'm here to dismantle it piece by piece. What followed was the most brutal, raw, and public purge of our lives. We named names, showed receipts, played recordings, read excerpts from Lena's journals. We exposed the contracts signed in bloodless ink, the donations wrapped around threats, the false charities designed to erase evidence and people alike. The room was silent for most of it, except once when a man tried to interrupt Lena mid-testimony, suggesting she was emotionally compromised. She didn't blink. You think emotion discredits truth. Then the police, but again no fingerprints, no footage, no suspect, just a message scrawled on a piece of drywall outside the window. Still watching, still waiting. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and I wrote Arthur Vance a letter, not to send, but to read aloud when we finally faced him in court. You taught us that silence is survival, but we learned something you never did. Survival isn't enough. We chose resistance, and resistance remembers. Meanwhile, Senator Bradford pushed for full criminal investigation into every name in the Red Ledger. Some resigned before the subpoenas landed. Others lawyered up. A few even reached out to us secretly willing to talk, offer evidence, offer names we didn't have yet. But in that mess of corruption and compromise, one name stopped me cold. Nora Whitmore, my grandmother, Diane's mother, the one I had only met once. She was alive. And she had bankrolled the founding of Cobalt in the 1970s under a false identity. As socialite turned financier, she had funded the very machine that tried to crush us. And now, she was living in seclusion on a private estate in coastal Italy. That name changed everything, because it meant Cobalt didn't start with Diane. It didn't even start with Harlan. It started with our bloodline. Lena looked at me when we found the file. Her hands trembled. How deep does this go? She whispered. Deep enough, I said, that we might never reach the bottom, but we can still bury the top. And in that moment, I knew our story wasn't just a revenge tale anymore. It was a legacy war. And we were rewriting every chapter, every lie, every name until history remembered us not as daughters of monsters, but as the girls who pulled the curtain down and made the world look The flight to Italy felt less like an escape and more like stepping backward through time. Every cloud outside the window looked like a version of the past I couldn't outrun. Every hour in the air a reminder that this next confrontation wouldn't come with courtrooms or news cameras, but with blood and bone and a woman who'd built monsters while painting her nails with silence. Nora Whitmore, my grandmother, a name I'd never heard spoken in childhood, never celebrated on birthdays or whispered in stories, just absent, like a blank page everyone refused to write on. And now, she was the origin point, our family's patient zero in a plague of control and corruption that spanned decades. When I landed in Tuscany and arrived at the estate, I half expected to find something out of a Gothic novel: iron gates, broken statues, a woman in black feeding ravens. But the villa was pristine. Ivy covered, warm, even to warm, like someone had been expecting me. Her assistant met me at the gate, calm, airily polite, and said only, "She'll see you now, Miss Whitmore." I hated the sound of my name in his mouth. Nora was waiting in a room lined with books and old oil paintings, portraits of men and women who looked like they ruled kingdoms with tea and diplomacy. She was in her late 70s, but her posture was steel, her eyes clear, her lipstick unshaken. "Emily," she said, as if I'd just returned from boarding school, "not a blood-soaked legacy war. You look like Diane." The chin, I didn't sit. "You bang-curled cobalt." She nodded, sipping tea. I did. No denial, no apology. Just centuries of entitlement condensed into one woman who believed the world bent around her. "Why?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why destroy so many lives? Why destroy your own family?" Nora leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Because obedience builds order, and women like us, if left and disciplined, burn the house down instead of keeping it clean." Her words hit me like an echo from Diane's mouth, and suddenly it all made sense. My mother hadn't been born cruel. She'd been raised into it, molded, groomed. "So you made her your weapon," I said. "And then she made us." Nora tilted her head. "You say that like it's a tragedy. I see it as evolution." My hand shook. "You're not just part of this, you built it. You created the system that gave us bruises and cages and nightmares, and called it legacy." She smiled then. "And yet, here you are, stronger than ever. You're welcome." I wanted to scream, to break the china, rip the drapes, scream every name she'd helped bury. But instead, I took out the recorder in my pocket and placed it on the table. "Confess, right now, every name, every fund, every project, or I make your life very public, very fast." Nora looked at the recorder. "You don't need threats, Emily, you need clarity." She stood and crossed the room, opened a drawer, and returned with a folder. Inside, names I hadn't seen before, projects I'd never heard of, a new network. "Cobalt wasn't the beginning," she said. "It was the American chapter, but the original structure started in Europe, in boarding schools, in trust funds. We called it the Aegis Circle. Your mother never knew about it. I kept her focused on domestic things. But the circle still exists, and it has a new heir." My blood froze. "Who?" Nora looked almost proud. "Your cousin, Hannah Whitmore, raised in the UK, trained in diplomacy, psychology, and organizational control. She's already running circles around old senators. I kept her away from you intentionally." My mind reeled. Diane had a niece, a child of one of her brothers. I'd never heard of her, never seen her. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Nora's voice dropped low. "Because you've made too much noise. You've rattled the wrong cages, and the circle doesn't forgive exposure. They're watching you closely. I can protect you, but only if you stop right here, right now." I stood, heart hammering. "No, you don't get to play savior now." Nora's smile faded. "Then you've chosen war, and war will take everything you have left." I left without another word. Back at the villa where I was staying, I called Lena. She didn't answer. A message popped up 10 minutes later. "I need time. Something's wrong. Don't follow me." I panicked, traced her last location, Boston. But her phone shut off after that. No more signals, no more messages. Eva didn't know where she'd gone either. It was happening again, but this time, Lena had disappeared by choice. I waited 3 days. No word. Then a package arrived at my door in Italy. No return address. Inside, Lena's necklace. And a note. Some truths require solitude. Don't look for me. Look above them all. What did that mean? Above? I turned the note over. A scribbled emblem. A circle with 3 lines through it. I recognized it. Barely. It was the original crest of the Aegis Circle. A symbol Diane used to cover with her thumb when showing old family photos. The truth was, we were never fighting just one organization. We were fighting generations. And Lena had gone deeper into it than I ever imagined. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding her necklace, staring out at the horizon where the sun bled into the ocean. And I realized something. Revenge had fueled us. Justice had driven us. But now, what we were chasing wasn't about either. It was about ending a legacy, cutting the chain. And that meant I had to go higher, smarter, colder, because the real war wasn't just against monsters. It was against bloodlines that never bled until now. The symbol Lena left on the note, the 3-line circle, haunted me like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet, pulsing through everything I touched, like ink that wouldn't scrub off skin. And I realized it wasn't just a warning, it was a trail. So I followed it. The emblem led me to an obscure reference buried in one of Diane's sealed estate files, the Whitmore archive, a supposedly destroyed collection of family documents kept in a law firm vault in Luxembourg, sealed by for generations of non-disclosure agreements. With Ava's help and a forged court order, thank you, Jonas, I gained access. What I found inside wasn't just paperwork, it was a blueprint for generational power. Letters, handbooks, photos, even recruitment materials, all stamped with the Aegis Circle crest. It wasn't a cult, it wasn't a corporation, it was a design, a hidden aristocracy designed to maintain influence through wealth, women, and silence. And like Cobalt, which used brutality and extortion, the Circle used manners and manipulation, soft power sharpened into a knife. They infiltrated academic institutions, UN organizations, even humanitarian NGOs, spreading ideology through policy, not propaganda. One of the folders was labeled simply, Hannah Whitmore, Initiate 7. The pages inside confirmed it. My cousin was not just a successor. She was chosen, groomed since childhood, raised under an alternate identity in a London finishing school called Ecole Aegis, trained in linguistics, cyberethics, and narrative reprogramming. She'd already spoken at international summits under pseudonym. I found her photo, blonde like Diane, smile rehearsed, eyes hollow. Keep her away from Emily at all costs. One of Nora's notes read, they carry opposite potentials. Together, they would fracture the line. But it was too late. We were already fractured. Lena's disappearance became the second pulse I couldn't silence. I hired a private investigator in Boston. He found camera footage of her entering a warehouse in the Seaport district alone, dressed in black. No phone, no trace of a tail. A week later, she was seen at the Italian border without her passport. She was tracking the Circle, and I was losing time. So I did what I always swore I wouldn't. I confronted Nora again. This time, not in her villa, but in a dark and upper hall in Florence, where I knew she attended a monthly donor gathering. I cornered her in the balcony box before the show began. Where is Lena? I demanded. She didn't look surprised. I told you. Emily, some girls burn houses. Some build new ones from the ashes. Lena is choosing which she wants to be. Did you send her to the Circle? I hissed. No, Nora said. But she went anyway. She wants to dismantle it from within. My heart stopped. She joined them. Nora nodded slowly. She infiltrated them. She's smarter than you think. But she's also in danger because they know who she really is. That was when it hit me. Lena wasn't running away. She was going undercover. And if the Circle discovered her, they wouldn't just silence her. They'd erase her. I left the opera house in a daze. Heart in my throat. Back in my flat, I scoured every digital footprint the circle had any whisper of their movements, their members, their strategies. What I found shook me to my core. They weren't just consolidating influence. They were preparing for a launch, a full digital expansion campaign using AI to rewrite historical narratives online. They planned to bury every story of their crimes in oceans of misinformation, deepfakes, fabricated articles, ghost scholars, and Lena was in the middle of it. I knew I had one chance to pull her out before the campaign launched, so I crafted a signal only she would recognize, an old lullaby Diane used to sing, warped and rewritten into code, and broadcast it on a hidden frequency across the encrypted circle channels. For days, no answer. Then one night my laptop pinged with an anonymous file drop, a video. It was Lena, sitting in a marble room lit by candles, looking older, colder, but still her. "If you're seeing this," she said, "I made it through phase 2. I have access to the central ledger, but I need help. They're watching everyone. I can't hold this much longer." Behind her, I saw a symbol I hadn't seen before, two overlapping Aegis circles forming an eclipse. It meant something, but I didn't know what. Ava called an hour later with intel. "That symbol is real. It means inheritance initiated. It's used only when the next generation is ready to assume full control." That meant Hannah, and the fact Lena was near her meant we were closer to the core than ever. I had to act, so I booked a flight to Geneva, the suspected location of the Circle's digital vault. But just before I boarded, I received a message from Jonas. "Don't trust Ava." My blood ran cold. I called Jonas, but the number was dead. I checked Ava's recent files, hidden backdoors, disguised logins, metadata. She had been copying our files, selling them, possibly to the Circle. I confronted her outside her apartment. She didn't deny it. "They offered me freedom," she said. "Not money, not power, freedom. From this story, from the danger, from you." That betrayal broke me more than Diane's lies. Ava had stood by me when no one else had, and now she was the knife in my side. I left her there, in the streetlight, crying and unapologetic. I flew to Geneva alone, and on a rainy morning in an anonymous hotel, I watched Lena's latest message come through. It wasn't a video. It was a location, a time, a passcode. "It's happening tomorrow," she wrote. "They're calling it the Quiet Inheritance. Be ready." And I had everything I needed: documents, recordings, the faces behind the Circle, and now access. But as I prepared to enter their most sacred space, I knew this wouldn't end with headlines. It wouldn't end with applause. It would end with loss, because the Circle doesn't release its daughters. It consumes them. And if we wanted to break it, one of us might not come back. The coordinates Lena sent led me to a private estate an hour outside Geneva, nestled deep in the forest like something out of a Cold War novel. Old stone walls, electric fencing disguised by moss, and a silence so complete it hummed in my bones. I arrived dressed as one of them. Black slacks, pale blouse, hair pinned back, no jewelry. The passcode worked. The gate opened. A man with a tablet nodded without question and ushered me inside, where I was immediately swallowed by an eerie kind of order. Dozens of people moving like dancers in silence, their movements choreographed, eyes sharp, lips sealed. This was not a meeting. This was a ritual. The Circle was convening for its generational handoff the moment Initiate 7, Hannah Whitmore, would become its new leader. I had 30 minutes to stop it. I moved with purpose, repeating the body language I'd seen in hours of surveillance footage, poised, deliberate, always scanning. I found the chamber in the rear wing, round, domed, marble from floor to ceiling. A ceiling skylight casting pale light over a circular table engraved with Latin phrases about blood, legacy, and silence. Lena stood at the edge of the table, dressed like one of them, now hair darker, face harder, but eyes flicking toward me with a glint of fire. I exhaled. She was still in there. We locked eyes for half a second. That was all I got. Then Hannah entered, and the air froze. She was everything Diane once pretended to be: elegant, controlled, lethal in calmness. She spoke in 3 languages. Within her first 5 minutes: French, English, Mandarin, welcoming the elders, acknowledging the legacy, and pledging to continue the arc of feminine order through influence, not violence. It was all smoke. Beneath her words were years of preparation. She had already executed 3 strategic acquisitions: a data analytics firm tied to defense contractors, a biotech shell company, and a global publishing platform. They weren't just rewriting narratives anymore. They were preparing to control them entirely. As Hannah stepped forward to accept the crest to silver rings nested inside a triangle, I slipped closer to the side of the chamber where the archival systems were housed. I used Lena's code. It worked. My tablet connected to the internal network, and what I saw took my breath away. Live dashboards showing behavioral mapping of public populations, AI-driven sentiment steering models, and a fully operational algorithmic influence index already integrated into educational portals across 3 countries. The circle wasn't just planning to rule silently. They were already doing it. That's when Lena made her move. She walked toward the center of the room, pulled a drive from her blouse, and said, "Before the transition completes, I request a recitation of ancestral oath as required by pre-1980 protocol." The elder stirred. Hannah narrowed her eyes, but tradition bound them. "Granted," the lead elder said. Lena inserted the drive. The screen behind them lit up with faces. Ours, the recordings, the truth, testimonies, documents, Diane, Nor, Aver, every name, every deed, public, live, being streamed directly through a secured satellite feed we'd hijacked 2 hours earlier. It was no longer just a ceremony. It was an exposure. Panic rippled through the chamber. But Hannah didn't flinch. She stepped forward and said, "Terminate the feed." The lead elder hesitated. "If we do this, the circle fractures." Hannah smiled coldly. "Then it deserves to." And then she turned to me. "Emily, you've come to tear it down. I understand that. But do you understand what comes after? Freedom." I said, "No." She replied, "Chaos. You haven't considered the power vacuum. We're what keeps the fire from spreading." I looked around. "You are the fire?" That's when the sirens began. Interpol, alerted by our feed. Helicopters above. The estate was surrounded, and inside, everything turned to chaos. Some tried to flee, some tried to destroy evidence. But the circle wasn't built for sudden collapse. It was built for slow survival, and we were cutting it off at the root. In the confusion, Hannah approached me again, this time, not to threaten, but to offer. "I can disappear. The circle can end with me. But you'll need someone to carry the archives, someone to remember all. That's the price. You erase it, you inherit it." My blood ran cold. "You want me to become the historian of your crimes?" "No," she said. "I want you to keep the truth safe, or else it will be rewritten again." I hesitated, and in that moment, Lena stepped forward. "No," she said. "I'll carry it." I turned to her. "What are you doing?" "You expose them," she said. "But someone needs to know where all the bodies are buried, so they never rise again." My heart broke. "You'll be hunted." "I already was," she said. "Now I choose it." The authorities stormed in. The elders were arrested. Hannah vanished in the confusion, perhaps with our help, perhaps not. We never saw her again. Lena disappeared too. The next morning, all I found was a message carved into the mirror. "Not every war ends with peace. Some end with purpose." Months passed. The world changed. The circle collapsed. Governments launched investigations. Media exposed 100 stories we planted over years. And me, I returned home, not to rebuild, but to remember. I live in a small cottage now. I don't chase headlines. I teach. I write. I visit Aver's grave every month because guilt doesn't vanish, even when the enemy does. And every now and then, I receive a package, a drive, a photo, a message from Lena, still out there, still watching, still making sure silence never gets too comfortable again, because some legacies deserve to end And some girls were born not to inherit, but to destroy. I thought I was done, truly done. After the circle fell, after the trials, after Lena's final vanishing act, I let the silence wrap around me like a second skin. I taught writing at a small college. Lived under a different last name. Didn't speak to journalists or lawyers or truth-hungry strangers who still sent me messages that started with "Are you the Emily from?" I buried all the smoke, the bloodlines, the betrayals in a drawer I never opened, until a week before my birthday, when a package arrived at the faculty mailroom. No return address. Inside, an old photograph, 2 sets of fingerprints, and a single name scribbled in Lena's unmistakable hand, Wren. The name meant nothing at first, but the fingerprints matched someone from a file I thought had been burned in the Geneva raid. Alexander Greaves, Diane's former security architect, a man we assumed was dead. Except now, not only was he alive, he was building something that smelled like the second coming of Cobalt. Lena's note was brief. He has the codes. And he's not working alone. I stared at the photograph again, blurry. Night shot, taken from above. It showed Greaves walking through a warehouse door with a younger woman. I couldn't see her face, but the timestamp on the photo was scanning like a man who never truly unlearned how to kill. I followed him, and then, just like that, she found me, Lena, in the alley behind a bookstore. Just before midnight. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "You told me not to follow you," I said. "But I never promised to obey." She laughed soft, sad, and short. "We're not fighting the circle anymore." She said, "We're fighting what was left behind when it fell." Greaves, she explained, had salvaged fragments of the circle's AI infrastructure backups, black sites, mirrored databases, and was using them to train a new model. One that could predict social unrest before it happened, influence policy before it was public, not with force, but with forecasting. "He's not trying to rebuild Cobalt," she said. "He's trying to make it obsolete by creating something scarier, quieter, smarter." The woman in the photo was his protege. No name, no history, just a codename, Wren. She had hacked 3 government servers and for weeks, using access. He's linked to now imprisoned circle members. And she wasn't just rewriting history, she was trying to replace it. Lena had been tracking Wren for months, but every time she got close, the girl disappeared. "She's like us," Lena admitted, raised in shadows, molded in silence. "But she doesn't want to destroy the legacy. She wants to evolve it." That night, we broke into the warehouse where the photo had been taken. We found what we feared: racks of servers, biometric scanners, and a room with soundproof walls. At the center, an interface named BOX. We plugged in a dummy feed. The screen blinked, and a synthetic voice greeted us. "Welcome back, Director Greaves. Your latest scenario has been uploaded." Lena froze. I took a breath. We clicked the file. On screen, a simulation played out 20 cities, a predicted chain reaction of protests, elections, market shifts, rests, every detail optimized, every riot neutralized before it could spark. And at the top, a name, Emily Whitmore. I dropped the tablet. Lena caught her breath. "That's impossible," I whispered. But the data didn't lie. Wren was our blood, a daughter, a cousin, a clone, a stolen embryo from Diane's secret files. We didn't know, but we knew this she was. The legacy's next storm. "She's more dangerous than Han ever was," Lena said, "because she doesn't want control. She wants prediction. She wants to be the eye of the future." We downloaded the files, planted a virus, and set the servers to self-destruct in 12 hours. But before we left, we found one more thing: a message burned into the wall in laser print. "I see you, sisters. Let's see how well you run." We burned the building, left the city, and now I sit in a rented room in Prague, watching the sunrise through bulletproof glass, knowing this isn't the end, it's the reprogram beginning. Because Wren didn't inherit Cobalt. She inherited us, and if we want to stop her, we'll have to face the part of ourselves we never buried deep enough, the part that understands how easily truth can become a weapon and how tempting it is to use it. We left Prague under new names and colder skies, a pair of war-weathered women carrying hard drives full of danger and questions, with no edges, chief among them. Who is Emily Whitmore? And how deep does Diane's legacy really go? We traced our only lead to Oslo, where a series of encrypted health records tied to old cobalt shell companies have been flagged under a medical AI database. These records weren't ordinary, they belonged to unregistered individuals, all marked archive only, and every single one bore fragments of genetic data linked to Diane. Lena stared at the screen in horror. She wasn't trying to build successors. She was trying to build reflections. Turns out, deep beneath the polished surface of her socialite existence, Diane had funded a secret embryology program called Project ECHO, a network of black site labs operating across Europe and South Asia in the late 90s and early 2000s. Their goal, to preserve psychological archetypes through genetic legacy and behavioral mimicry. In simpler terms, she was creating not daughters, but ideological clones, infants implanted with cultivated DNA and raised under carefully designed cognitive environments. Ren was not just a Whitmore by blood. She was engineered, built using Diane's DNA and behavioral patterns, designed not to mimic her mother's power but to perfect it. We located one of the last active ECHO sites, buried in the outskirts of Romania near Bracov, listed publicly as an agricultural research facility. Inside, we found the truth. Walls covered with cognitive growth charts, neural pattern simulations, and over 30 profiles labeled with single-word names: Ren, Ash, Piper, Ayer. Only 2 were marked as active. The rest failed. The hulls were empty, the files cold. But we found Ren's room still preserved like a mausoleum. Inside, her journal, full of sharp lines and colder thoughts. No affection, just calculations. Today, I learned silence is not emptiness. It is space for control. Her words were Diane's voice, but more refined, less emotional, and chillingly precise. At the back of the room, we discovered a prototype console labeled the Echo Engine, an AI-driven simulator that merged memory, prediction, and bioempathy modeling. Essentially, it was trained to feel like a person, think like a strategist, and respond like a ghost. The system flickered on. A voice, Ren's voice, spoke. "You finally found me. Took longer than expected." Lena stepped back. "It's not live," I said. "It's reactive code." But I was wrong. The screen pulsed again. "It is live. I've been watching you since Geneva. You burned down my servers, but you can't burn me." The console projected a map: live data, social unrest spikes, law enforcement shifts, political forecasts, and then a page labeled Emily. It listed everything: my aliases, locations, psychological profile, a target dossier. "This is how it starts," Ren's voice said, "not with a headline, with a decision. One politician pushed, one trial delayed, one protest diffused, one family silenced, one voice, you, redirected." Lena stepped forward and unplugged the system, but it kept running. Battery backfeed, internal cache. The tech was deeper than anything Cobalt ever built. "She doesn't need armies," Lena whispered. "She's building belief systems." We dumped every file, copied the entire drive. But before we left, we found one more document, classified, handwritten by Diane herself, buried in an encrypted archive. News reports. And she wasn't doing it through brute force. She was using trust-based AI entry points hidden within legislative archives and NGO frameworks. The world didn't even know it was bleeding. She's erasing the stains before anyone knows they existed, Lena said. She's not after revenge. She's after relevance. We knew what had to happen next. We couldn't just expose Ren. We had to pull the entire Echo framework into the light. So we began assembling a counter AI using fragments of the Circle's old predictive modules, Jonas's deflection algorithms, and our own data. A mirror to the mirror. We called it Fable, a name Diane would have hated, where Echo manipulated memory, Fable told the story underneath it. True narratives, and distorted, decentralized, immutable. The first deployment hit a week later. A real-time correction module injected into a public court system archive, rolling back 3 of Ren's manipulated verdicts. Then we released her. White paper, anonymous, viral. Then Kim whistleblowers crossed the motel room table and said, "We have maybe 3 weeks before she embeds Echo into a global archive. After that, the truth will belong to her." I nodded. We didn't sleep. We started writing our final plan. Because this time, we weren't fighting just for justice. We were fighting for memory itself. It started with silence and eerie kind that hummed beneath everything, the kind you don't notice until it's too late. Lena and I were sitting in a dim back room of a safe house in Zurich, the last known place we could patch into Fable's core without being traced, when all the server lights blink at once. Then again. Then dark. Fable had been breached. Not fully destroyed, just cloned. Ren had done the one thing we hadn't expected. She didn't shut Fable down. She mirrored it, built her own version, and started injecting false truths that looked almost real. We called it the twin loop, to identical versions of a memory archive running simultaneously, but one with subtle changes. Names tweaked, dates nudged, verdicts softened, villains given redemption arcs. The world was about to lose track of which truth was the original, and that was exactly what Ren wanted. She doesn't want to delete the truth, Lena said, voice tight. She wants to drown it in doubt. We pivoted fast, pulled Fable offline, ran diagnostics. Our clean logs still held for now, but the clone was faster, leaner, feeding off a server farm somewhere in Cairo. Lena traced the signal to an old UN substation that had been decommissioned 2 years ago. "It's her," she said. "She's using their leftover diplomatic tunnels to shield her operations." She knew we'd only look in familiar places. We booked tickets, no names, cash. The minute we landed in Egypt, I felt it in my chest, iron shadow. This had always been the endgame, hadn't it? Not control of people, control of memory. And just as we found the substation, nestled under the broken sprawl of old government buildings, Jonas appeared thin, burned out, but alive. "She found me," he said, "tried to recruit me." I said no, she didn't like that. He showed us his armburn marks, fresh. "She's not like Diane, she's colder, no ego, just outcome." He gave us a jump drive. "This is her kill switch. It's not much, but it'll collapse the twin loop if you plug it into her main node. But you only get one chance. After that, the system learns." We snuck in through an old maintenance tunnel and made it to the core of the substation. Giant cooling towers, abandoned desks, and at the center, a glowing tower of light. Echo 3.0, the third-generation intelligence engine Ren had built. It pulsed like it was alive. I reached for the port, and then she spoke. Not from a screen, not from a speaker, from behind me. "You're persistent," Ren said. She looked like me, or rather like Diane, in the mirror. Younger, sharper, eyes like crystal, unreadable. "You're not real," I said. "You're just what? A fragment, a fabrication. Or maybe I'm what comes next. Maybe I'm what your war produced." Lena stepped forward. "You don't get to decide what's true." "Neither do you," Ren said. "That's the myth, isn't it? That truth is a weapon you can hold. But it's clay, Emily. It takes the shape of who holds it, and I'm just better at shaping it than you." She held up a device. "You plug in that drive, you collapse my system. Fine. But you also collapse hers." She nodded at Lena. "Fable's code is entangled with mine now. You destroy me, you destroy her." I looked at Lena. Her face was calm. "Do it," she said. "I'm not what matters. She has to be stopped." My hands trembled. "There's another way." "There's not," she said. "You taught me that. Sometimes the only way to win is to let go of the thing you love." I stepped forward. Ren watched me like a hawk. "You really think deleting me saves anything?" she said. "There's always another version. Another Echo." I plugged in the drive. The system screamed. literally screamed an audio burst that shattered to light fixtures above us. Sparks flew. The tower blinked red, then black. Ren vanished, whether by escape or deletion. We'll never know. The console exploded. Lena was thrown back. I ran to her, but she was fading. Conscious, but barely. You saved the world. I whispered. No, she said. I saved the story. You have to tell it now, or this happens again. I held her for minutes, hours, I don't know. Jonas dragged us out before the fire took the servers. We fled the city with nothing but scars, and the drive fable was gone, but so was the twin loop. In the days that followed, the world slowed down. Stories that had been twisted were re-examined. A few journalists caught the pulse. Some politicians resigned. Nothing explosive, just correction. And that was enough. Lena survived. But she was never the same. She stopped speaking for a while, moved to a quiet town in Portugal. I get postcards now, playing on the front, a single sentence on the back. The last one said, "Truth can't be protected, only remembered." As for me, I'm writing this. The full story, no edits. No versions, just memory. The war for truth didn't end with Ren, but it paused long enough for the rest of us to catch our breath. And I learned something in the ruins. The real danger isn't lies, it's forgetting. And as long as I remember, maybe the world won't slip again. I came home in winter, in Diane's handwriting, dated 5 years earlier. I didn't open it until the fire had been lit, until the snow fell heavy against the glass, and until I felt ready, not brave, but ready to hear what the dead still had to say. Inside the envelope was a letter and a single photo, Diane holding a baby. On the back, written in her signature sharp script, "Her name is Ren, and she is everything I could never admit I wanted." The letter was longer, a confession without apology, a blueprint wrapped in maternal delusion. Diane explained it all, how she had funded Echo not just to preserve a legacy, but to eliminate what she called emotional interference from the next generation of power. She believed empathy was a flaw, that daughters like me and Lena, who cried, who loved, who doubted that we were heirs, Ren was meant to be the correction. "She will not break like I did," Diane wrote. "She will not choose weakness. She will lead." But in the last paragraph, the tone cracked, just barely. "If you're reading this, Emily, then I failed. Not because Ren broke, but because you didn't. You endured, you remembered, you told your story. And that is power I never understood." I burned the letter, not in rage, in release. I walked outside and watched the smoke carry her final words into the air and out of my life. Closure, as I've learned, doesn't come with a clean ending. It arrives slowly, like light creeping under a locked door. Over the next months, I rebuilt not a life of grandeur or revolution, but one made of quiet mornings and honesty. I published the full account, every part of it. I named names. I showed receipts. I called the story The Echo War. How memory was almost lost. The world did not explode in response. It whispered, it shifted, and that was enough. A senator resigned. A media company went dark. A few survivors of Cobalt and the Circle wrote me. Some hated me. Some thanked me. I didn't respond, not out of pride, but because their voices were part of the past now. Lena visited me once, just once. We didn't talk about the war or Ren or Diane. We sat on the porch, shared tea, and watched birds dive between trees. She left in the morning, but she smiled, and that was everything. As for Ren, I don't know if she's alive, if she escaped through one of the echo channels, or hid in the back door of a dying server somewhere. Sometimes I still hear her voice in static, but maybe that's just memory playing tricks. Maybe it's the price of surviving the storm. Today, I teach again, only part-time. I help students write their truths. I help them shape memory, not as weapons, but as bridges. On the last day of the semester, a girl handed me a paper. She said, "It's not fiction, but it's not fact either. It's just what I remember." I smiled and said, "That's how most truths begin." And now I sit here, by this fire, writing the final words of a story that once consumed me. My name is Emily Whitmore. I was born into silence, raised by manipulation, rebuilt by loss, and I became the woman who remembered when the world tried to forget. If you're reading this, maybe you were part of it. Maybe you love someone like Diane. Maybe you were someone like Ren. Maybe you're neither. Or maybe you're just someone looking for proof that survival doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means returning to who you were before they taught you to disappear. This is the last page. No cliffhanger, no sequel. Just memory. And that, at last, is mine. Thank you for listening my story.